OPTMZ.
Cait Monaham is a cultural strategist, trend forecaster, and currently the editor-in-chief of Hype. Her work explores the intersection of fashion imagery, emergent technologies, and internet culture, translating cultural signals into strategic insight through long-form editorials, design thinking methodologies, focus groups, and research-led projects. With clients ranging from WGSN to Nike, Cait helps brands speak to the movements and moments that matter most to creative audiences, both online and offline. Alongside her practice, she guest lectures across the University of the Arts London institutions.
Hi, last one, should we do it? There was a brief intro. I think I've met a couple of you, so nice to see you again if we have met. But yeah, my name is Cait Monaham, and I'm an editor and strategist, and currently the editor-in-chief of Hype. And for the past, I guess, 6 years or so, a lot of my editorial, I'm just going to sit down actually, I feel like I'm presenting too much. A lot of my editorial works, for the past 6 years or so have been really around kind of fashion and technology. And one of the most recent editorial kind of outputs was a op-ed for Morning Agency called Accessorizing Networked Bodies. So I kind of want to just expand on that idea a little bit today. So it's looking really at, like, I guess, ways in which fashion is getting the optimized or networked body really right, how fashion and technology partnerships are coming into play with it, and then I guess we'll do also a bit of an audit on ways that I think it's going wrong in collaborations, and ultimately just wanting to ask here who gets to own the style, the symbolism, and the commerce of the networked self. I think the optimized self and the network self, there's probably variation that we could talk about for a whole session, but I'll use them, I suppose, relatively interchangeably. I think that network self potentially is something that's a little bit more subconscious, like it's just happening, whereas optimized, maybe you feel like it's something that you're actively participating in. But anyways, we can have a conversation about that afterwards. So if you are like me, you'll notice that fashion's obsession with cyborg bodies is absolutely everywhere. This collection, Alexander McQueen's Cyborg, is referenced every single time you ever have a conversation about fashion and technology, as it should be, to be fair. And Gucci's Fall Winter 18 collection also was called Cyborg, and I'm sure a lot of you in this room have seen images of this collection before, but it's basically models carrying replicas of their heads, and it was set in this kind of surgical setting, kind of alluding to the fact that the creative director has, the ability to shape and cut and mold and amend its wear. And then Gentle Monster, which if transhumanists ask you to jump, Gentle Monster just asks how high, and it keeps jumping and jumping and jumping and jumping. They do a really, really good job, but a lot of different fashion technology partnerships. And as a fashion technology editor, I guess I ask myself how fashion and technology overlap. And I think all of the, case studies that we mentioned above are really strong examples of that. But sometimes, or I don't know, maybe even most of the time, I'm either writing about technology or fashion, specifically within the luxury context. Because sometimes, or maybe a lot of the time, fashion and technology look like this. I don't know, right? I don't know. Dolce & Gabbana, Fall Winter 21.
Who am I? The answer lies around.
written in all colors and emotions, utters in all tones of joy and pain, in thousand-figured, thousand voice, our money's nature. Then, in this strange dream, we catch shadows.
I don't know. Hugo Boss, Spring Summer 25, Sophia the Robot, which this was actually a very beautiful collection and very well done in terms of like the holistic world that they built. But then at the after party, they brought Sophia through, and this is what it looked like. So I don't know, I don't know. Outside of robotics and luxury settings, there's also a fair bit of wearables. So the Gucci Aura ring is probably the most recent kind of successful example of this. It looks great, but there is a whole Reddit thread talking about how the gold bands and the logos are falling off after a couple months' time, and people are not very happy about it. There's also AR, augmented eyewear fashion partnerships, and some of them are great, but some of them look like this. And it's from a product perspective, I think that's where we potentially start to see some like sentiment issues with how a fashion-specific audience is receiving technology collaborations. And again, not to say that like they're all bad. I'm sure there's so many examples of how to get it right. But this is more kind of at like a luxury setting, I would say. And sometimes within conversations around AI, just this is like personal experience, posting collections that have used AI outwardly, kind of your question around like infiltrating or integrating. Sometimes the sentiment looks like this. So, people throwing tomatoes at you and being quite scared of the idea that AI was used in a campaign. And again, this is not doom and gloom. I think it's just about raising conversations around how at a luxury level, fashion and technology are working together in areas that sometimes they might be missing the mark. So I guess the reason that I'm really passionate about this is like I love fashion and technology, and I think there's so many ways that it works well. But when different collections and collaborations, campaign imagery, products themselves, wearables, etc., come out like this, it starts to taint the narrative. So I want to start to consider or think about in my personal practice, but also the ways, just the case studies in which I cover editorially. When do fashion and technology actually benefit each other? Because that's the stuff that is really worth writing about and celebrating. And I think in order to answer that question, I guess it probably seems obvious to a lot of us in this room, but I think that potentially the biggest gap here is that fashion technology partnerships are missing the optimized body. They're missing the networked body. They're not necessarily considering the messy and tumultuous and glitchy and maybe detached at times or hyper attached at other times, that self. And there's gaps in understanding about what that body is. So just to go, I guess, a little bit more into the body then. Sorry, I'm just going to pull this back up. I know that there's probably been a lot of conversations, probably every talk in the last couple of days has talked about what the body today looks like. But just to kind of echo it, I think we all know the vibes, like the body is surveilled and deep-faked and hyper-embodied and disembodied, and it's not post-human exactly, but at the very least it is networked. And this author, Vahani Vara, in her book, Searches Selfhood in the Digital Age, wrote, "Our subtle self-modification according to technological capitalism's norms is so pervasive that certain types of performances have their own names: Instagram, face, TikTok, voice. And we make amendments to them based on algorithmic recommendations. And through this process of identity augmentation, Christina Adain says in her essay, we're becoming aesthetic operating systems. Or in other words, the immaterial things that we might see on our screens become very material when they start to impact our discernment and bodily choices long before they even register as a conscious decision. And I think with that understanding that our bodies are all at least a little bit networked, it starts to make sense, or at least a little bit more sense, why fashion adjacent audiences may feel disconnected to the tech being served to them without considerations to these truths. So as our bodies become operating systems, how do we dress them? I wonder if we looked at it another way. I think, like I said, fashion technology has the chance to kind of cut through the noise and better understand each other by understanding the body and bringing attention or platforming the real pressures that our bodies might be under. So when I started thinking about ways in which this could work, I kind of started thinking about the different categories of fashion tech partnerships. And I can just kind of go through these really quickly now. So the first one, so I'm thinking about like hardware, software, and worldware. Hardware is, of course, like it's the gear, it's the gadgets, it's the physical, tangible things, it's the robots on the runway, and it's kind of what we use to adorn ourselves with technology in a sense. Software is, very potentially obviously, but just the biometric systems that read us. So it's less about the physical device or the physical accessory, but it's more about the relationship between our body and that fashion tech product. And then worldware, I think, is the one that is really like underhyped and undervalued. And that's kind of more of the cultural aesthetic or script that shapes how we're understood and why we put on what we put on. And I think at more of a macro level, it's also important to think about commerce. So it's one thing to team up, like fashion and technology teaming up together, but how do you create a market for it? How do you create adoption? How do you sell it? And then style, how do you make it fashionable, aesthetic, like interesting for a fashion audience? And then symbolism, what does it mean? Why does it matter? Why are we doing it now? What's the context and rationale? So like I mentioned, I think, there's so many different ways to do fashion and tech that works well. In a dream situation, I think all of these would kind of work in combination. So I wanted to just kind of go specifically into each category then and think about ways that we can start to get it right. By designers that are already very much foreseeing these issues and thinking about these things. So first up is hardware. Again, this is kind of, the robots and the armor and everything that we think about when we think about sci-fi fashion, I suppose. And when luxury brands use hardware, specifically robots, they're actually typically highly praised. Mugler, when Zendaya wore this archive Mugler robot suit, it actually gained the brand 13 million in media exposure. So everyone was really, really interested in it. And then when Schiaparelli, who I imagine a lot of us remember this collection, when Schiaparelli launched this kind of robotic baby and accessories, all of the publications were kind of saying that it's the star of the couture season. But I think it asks the question, or perhaps begs it, like, who is this actually for? And I think that having hardware within your collection in terms of longevity, instead of just saying like, oh, we're gonna have a robot in here, it's like actually creating a narrative needs to have a little bit more context. And in speaking with Anna Roman, who's a creative technologist, She wrote a piece on this basically saying that if your cyborg fashion doesn't acknowledge politics or the temperature of culture, forgetting who is already living in that future, then it's just techno drag with a price tag. And she starts talking about this, calling it interface theater, I suppose, like using a robot but not really understanding what's going on with robotics and optimized bodies today. So when does hardware hit though? When does it feel good? I think about ARCA, I think about Subdeliza, whose uses of exoskeletons feel deeply rooted in the honesty of living between fragmented selves. I feel like their cyborgism and the aesthetics that follow include activism, insight, and lived experience. And then a material researcher that frequently works with Subdeliza, Esme, writes, cyborg fashion is not just a subgenre of speculative aesthetics or wearable technology. It's about material, visual, and spatial practices through which subjectivity is explored. And I think in this thinking, it's about how people use clothes, materials, and their bodies to show what it means to be part human and a little bit more part technology as well. I also look at Xander Zhao, who I think he comes back to these aesthetics every single season. He doesn't just tap in and then tap out immediately. And I think that's really beautiful and refreshing that there's a designer that's so dedicated to building these speculative futures for his brand. And yeah, it's always great to see. Hannah Shin as well she has exoskeletons in her collections, but they're specifically for physical mobility challenges. It's not wearing an exoskeleton to wear one. It's kind of creating a larger audience and having her collection be more inclusive to more people. And yeah, ultimately, I think that designers like these, when they come out, like, they're really highly praised. People really like it because you can tell the honesty and you can tell the dedication to the narrative every single season. Next, just to quickly talk about software. So yeah, software is all the kind of underbelly. It's the NFCs and garments that are connecting us to potentially brand platforms or websites. It's the luxury logoed biometric wearables. And I think there's a couple examples of where this has gone really well. I think one that was probably the biggest news story around this in the last couple of years was Coperni, who collaborated with Human AI to do this kind of like wearable AI device, and Naomi Campbell wore it, and it was a really big deal. What would have been a really nice partnership for fashion technology, a nice win. But the product was actually discontinued before it ever came out. And that wasn't Coperni's fault, I don't think. But it is to say that there's the difference between covering it as an article and thinking about creating that consumer adoption. And I think designers that are doing this really well is a studio based in Spain called Patio Studio, and they build kind of speculative futures around biometric wearables. And I think they're really interesting because they look at biometrics and software as something that can be about identity affirmation and like exchanging of creative ideas as opposed to optimization itself. And sorry, they've had a little quote that I wanted to share, but I think I've lost it now. But this kind of sentiment around exchange reminded me of this Japanese label called Unreal Edge. And Unreal Edge basically had these LED garments for their recent collection, and they can change based on a wearer's mood, and they can also be exchanged. So if I'm wearing one of the garments and you are, we can exchange the image that's coming up to it. And I think that's really interesting. So kind of through that lens, software becomes about identity making and co-creation as opposed to optimization alone. And last one is worldware. So again, if hardware is the gadgets and software is the data, worldware is more of the kind of cultural conversation behind them. It's the discourse that tech provokes without necessarily having to use the tech itself. And I think one thing that's really interesting about the worldware conversation right now is that the designers are really creating a lot around like the body as a material. And it's something that feels really refreshing because to me, like, this is the optimized body. It's like, it's a shirt made out of skin. And it's a way that we can be really honest about what's happening to the body and how it feels to be in our bodies now. And for me, these collections kind of feel like they're more of a symptom of technology instead of the other way around. And I really love that. So one example is Staff Only, who did a collection called Lost in Errors, which was all about the body and glitch. And I think it can also just be about kind of the honesty of feeling a little bit like trapped or claustrophobic even in our bodies, which was actually, the inspiration behind this designer called Rosie during her CSM grad show. So just to move here. Beautiful. And yeah, so for me, when Worldware lands, the outputs are honest. They celebrate network bodies as hybrid, not just digital and physical, meaning that they acknowledge that self-editing is happening, but it doesn't have to be through this like super glossy, techy, hi-fi way. And I think that these examples really matter in fashion tech because they reframe the body as something like uncontrollable, and it's still being observed as fashion has always done, and we've always observed the body, but it feels like they're doing it in their own terms, which I feel like is really important. So if I were to dress an optimized body, I would continue to champion work like this, work that questions technology. And I think because when we envision whatever hardware, software, worldware together in combination, we can do it on our own terms. So I think that's the last slide. Yes, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Sure.
Does anyone have any questions? Let me just get my I was wondering, one of the things I was thinking about in terms of, at the beginning you were saying about this kind of, maybe like a tension between tech or fashion and technology, and I was wondering like, perhaps part of it may be to do with the fact that recently I feel like I get a sense that like technology itself is no longer a kind of like marker or a kind of placeholder for the future, or at least like a positive future, or I guess even just in terms of like how AI is either seen as a kind of threat or is seen as a kind of like slop. And I've been kind of interested in that as a thing. So I was wondering like, and obviously like fashion has a strong connection with a kind of presentation of the future in some sort of form. So I was wondering, are there, I mean, maybe the presentation, some of the work that you showed at the end was kind of like an example of, if not necessarily like a positive, a kind of, like less, at least like a not a doomer, or kind of hyper kind of optimistic kind of view of of the future. So I don't know if that's a question. Probably not, but yeah. I mean, okay. So the question would be then sort of like, how do you see that kind of relationship, I guess, between fashion and tech in relation to this future that at least currently feels at least not positive?
Sure. Yeah. I feel like it can be positive still, because I think the positive part about all of this is that fashion audience, like, I think that we're being very honest about how we feel about everything, and we're not just like, it was, I feel like maybe in 2022 when I was doing like digital fashion panels, I was like, this is gonna take over everything, and I was going into it so blindly, but I don't think that we have the I don't think people are very blind to a lot of things. I think people are like really trying to educate themselves on these things, regardless if you're interested in technology or not. And I think that, like, regardless of where you land on that, like the want for understanding is a really like positive thing, and I think it will only bring, you know, more like better products and better campaigns and better imagery. But I think that the thing about the future is really interesting. It's always like nostalgia rises when things are dire, and people start selling the future. It's like marketing 101. So I think that, I don't know, it's always been there, but I think we'll still maybe keep selling the future, but maybe it will be a little bit more near. Like maybe it will be a future in 5 years as opposed to something like that Boss show where it's like in 2080. Because maybe it's just a bit too big to think about right now.
And I guess off the back of that, do you see, I guess, like, do you see fashion, or at least like certain fashion brands or designers, like having a positive or sort of constructive role in reshaping or repositioning technology? I was thinking also, it's kind of like some of the examples that you gave of, say, like the Dolce & Gabbana thing, with like, it felt what would seem to be so like cringy from my perspective would be that it's kind of it's just presenting an already established view of like what a robot would look like, and the robot is a representation of the future, and so I guess like your later examples did offer a kind of alternative view of how we engage with technology through fashion and, I guess, like the body. So is that something that you kind of, that role of fashion, do you see that as being kind of positive in that sense?
Definitely. And I think that, you know, courses like yours and people in this room, like that's what we're kind of after doing. And even seeing the last talk, it's like, that's incredible. There wasn't studios like that for that long into the past, you know, if that makes sense. So it gets me really excited because it's, you know, maybe not Dolce & Gabbana, but for Boss, it's like there could be, you know, a group of people in this room that come together and can consult about more like preferred futures or preferred realities, or at least more honest depictions of how fashion and technology feel together. And maybe it's just the case that there wasn't access to those resources or those creative agencies or networks before. So I feel like, I don't know, it could hopefully only get better from here. Mm-hmm.
Does anyone have? Oh, yeah.
Sure.
You'll have to forgive me, I'm a bit of an interloper into the world of fashion, so if this sounds naive and uneducated, it is. I suppose one of the things that struck me really strongly today, and it comes across very clearly in your talk, is a focus on the body, and perhaps a lack of focus on the face, or is the body distinguished from the face? And in your talk, the examples, especially Sophia, her face is so striking. And so the question that I want to ask, and just to give you just a tiny bit of my own context, I was just at that Please show in Berlin where you have these, you know, the faceless people.
Nice.
So the question I'm sort of circling around is, what is the relationship when you talk about about how the face gets incorporated as a space of adornment or a space where technology intervenes. Is it part of the body, or is it separate and exceptional? And how does it fit within the concept of self? So there's a bunch. Take it wherever you like.
Yeah, that's a great question. There are a lot of ways I could take it. I guess maybe I'll just answer it like for the purposes of this article. I would say, or what became this chat. I was really looking at the body as something that was an operating system, and that it was something that was engaging with technology, whether it's something physical or something online, in terms of like discernment and being attached to something that's even like that. I think we used the word network because it felt like the network to and through a software or a screen or what have you. So I think in that definition, the face is probably included in it, just because I didn't actually think about the face as something distinct. But of course, the face with facial recognition and pupil reading everything, and also beauty and self modification there, and Instagram filters and the operations and look maxing that go on with the face. That's like a whole other world that I didn't necessarily just specifically touch on. And I guess too, maybe it feels like fashion is like chin down in a way. It's like, obviously we can wear hats, but sometimes it feels like, is your face fashion? I don't know, maybe it is, but maybe it's just not the way that some of these examples were perceived. But that's a really, really good point about Sophia, how it was so visible and only her face was human and everything else was a robot, and that was obviously a very intentional choice.
I really love all the references that you've gathered, and I could see the students reacting to a lot of these references with a lot of excitement. Something about the face and visibility, and when I first saw, what's the show with Boston Dynamics and Copernic?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, was it 2024 or 2023?
Yeah.
And I think the first reaction a lot of people got is, oh, it's the robot dogs again.
Mm-hmm.
So boring, but and it has very little attention. They paid very little attention to the face, but I think it achieves certain style of worldwear that you're referring to, around how a lot of the garments from that campaign, from that show, is all around visibility and invisibility,
Mm-hmm.
and how the Boston Dynamics are serving a purpose of like a role to think about visibility as opposed to it being a dog or the
Yeah.
models being captured, and it was really interesting to see that. And it's like on surface it looks boring, or it has been done so many times, but
Yeah.
I think the dynamic becomes really interesting there.
Definitely, because the dog took the outfit, right? That's the one it was, and that's interesting that it's like you're on a runway adjacent space and you're showing a collection, and then the technology, the robot, whatever, the non-human entity in that space is taking the clothing away from you.
Something about the reflectiveness of the garment, of like all the garments in that show, that was around it's around reflection, and so there's a lot of light, reflection, and also acting, kind of hiding the face in
Yeah.
some way. Is really interesting.
Yeah,
I love
definitely.
all
Thank you.
I was just wondering also about, just to go back to the face thing, I was wondering whether the sort of lack or the kind of move away from the focus of the face may also be a sort of marker of a kind of new tech media era in a way. I mean, in a way, it's a slightly what we were questioning with this kind of question of kind of the optimized body as being like the body itself being, rather than being a kind of a representation of the body, but rather the body itself then becomes the kind of site of attention.
Yeah.
And maybe the face could be kind of seen as a kind of like a body part that references or is like indicative of the platform or social media era. I was thinking of like the TikTok face and the Insta face, and
Yeah.
you know, there's always a kind of like a face for each of these different kind of types of platforms or like social media platforms. But almost like what you were presenting at the end, almost like moved the technological kind of point of interest away from the face and actually the body.
Yeah.
So I don't know, there may be something interesting in that in terms of like, or something telling in that, in the sense that the face may be not the most important feature or body part,
Yeah.
possibly.
Yeah, definitely. It's like, I feel like there's always been maybe a boundary between like the face and body, which is maybe why I didn't consider the face specifically as when looking at the networked body. But I think that these kind of skin interfaces in the world where mentioned, it's like almost, it's playing with what we think are boundaries, like between public and private and like synthetic and like real skin material. So maybe it's, yeah, just continuing to question the same thing, but face and body together.
Does anyone else have it? Yeah.
So, the thing that really stuck with me about your presentation was you mentioned disabled bodies as well, which isn't really discussed in optimization, obviously. So I wanted to know, obviously it's a heavy question, completely different topic, but how have you seen disabilities incorporated in the optimized body? Have you noticed it be actually incorporated or eradicated?
Yeah, I from a fashion perspective, I actually can't think of too many examples of like physical mobility being something that's platformed or amplified, or I think exoskeletons are probably the closest, because it is sometimes with, at least from what I've seen, even in other industries like sex tech, for example, and physical mobility and disability there, it seems like the resource or the device needs to be almost better adopted or not perfected, but at least prioritized before fashion can kind of jump into the conversation. Like it's more of like a medical. And I think maybe that's why exoskeleton is, because exoskeleton is, you know, so important for physical mobility outside of fashion conversations. So no, I can't actually say that I know of many other examples outside of exoskeletons for fashion tech partnerships at this stage.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the sort of general take sort of like of optimization would be disability is seen as a problem that in principle could be solved through whatever it would be. But
Yeah.
I think that would be a sort of take of at least a certain understanding of optimization, which is like, anything like that is a problem and could be solved,
Right.
or should be solved, or, you know, like as mentioned by Hannah earlier, like something like age is seen as a disease, and there will be some pure techno solution to it.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Or size as well. I mean, obviously, with everything that you're doing with his empty, like body size, then becomes something that we need to fix. And obviously, fashion has been the worst proponent of body size inclusivity out of, you know, every single industry combined, probably. So.
But I think it would be an interesting. It would be interesting in terms of like how would that kind of play out, or how would we kind of imagine that?
Yeah.
Maybe that's a kind of, I mean, I guess again, some of the examples that you gave at the end maybe suggest at least a kind of opening up of what we understand bodies to be, which would then, open up space for disability to not be presented as a kind of like, like a problem that can and should be solved.
Yeah, definitely.
I guess like a final question that we've asked all of the speakers was, and again, we've kind of answered it in some form, but like, would be sort of, the kind of question of kind of optimization and sort of like, what does it mean for you? It seemed like you presented actually kind of a positive reading of it, or a positive definition of it. So I guess.
Yeah. What does optimize mean? I feel like I think I maybe mentioned this in the intro, but it's like, I think I actually have quite like positive reaction to the word optimization, because in parallel with networked or coded or something, a lot of the other words are digital self or whatever it is, like that just seems like something that happens to you, whereas optimization, it almost feels like something that, I mean, control is a strong word, but it feels like you're more in control, like whatever way you're trying to optimize, you know, like if that's aesthetically, if that's physically, if that's spiritually, if that's mentally, whatever. So I don't know, I feel like it's it's just, I don't know, maybe self-editing in whichever way you want to, at a very, maybe like in one sentence. Yeah.
Great. Thanks very much, Cait.
Thanks, guys.